All right. Well, good morning. How you guys doing? I hope you're excited to be here this morning. One of the things about when you decide that neighborhood's going to be your church, the cool thing is on Sunday morning, you don't have to wake up and wonder where you're going to go, what you're going to do. Sunday morning, you can be like, hey, I'm going to church, and I know where I'm going. And there's a lot of places you could be on a Sunday morning, and when you make that choice to be here, and you participate and you engage, then there's some things that happen. There's some things that happen in your life. There's some things that happen in the lives of those around you. And my prayer is that this time would be a valuable time for you, that it would become increasingly valuable to you as you make neighborhood church not just a place you go on Sundays, but you develop the relationships you have around here to truly make this a part of doing life with other people together. So if you have kids, maybe you have kids in the home right now. Maybe your kids were in the home, but now they're all grown up and they're gone. But if you had kids in your home at one point or another, then you know that the two most frequent words in a house with kids are not me. Not me. You know what I'm talking about? These 5 letters make up the response to almost any question that we ask our kids, right? For example, you go downstairs and the family room is empty, but the TV is blaring. And so you ask the question, who left the TV on? And the response is always, not me, right? Or you go downstairs and in the morning at breakfast, you're going to fix yourself some breakfast. You find the cereal box wide open, and the cereal inside has lost its crunch. It is stale. And you ask, who failed to close the lid on the cereal? And the response is, not me. All right, a show of hands, how many of you have heard that before, from kids? And okay, I'm in the right place. I am in the right place. Now, here's what we're going to do. We're going to have a little parents' rights rally right now, okay? And if you can identify with some of the examples I'm going to share with you, I want you to show your frustration with responding with their standard comeback line. Some of you started to do it already by responding all together, not me. All right? Are you ready? Let's try it. 1, 2, 3. Okay, here we go. Who left the toilet paper roll empty? Who ate all the Oreos? Who neglected to put the milk back in the fridge? Who left the garage door open all night? Who likes short sermons? Oh, we know that doesn't work for you, Pastor. No. Oh, my goodness. Well, I tricked you, but you came to the right church, all right? Because, just kidding, not really. All right, I want to remind you, these 2 parenting words, not simply to throw shade on all the teenagers and young people in the room this morning, but to highlight the truth that as adults, we often embrace this same childish attitude when it comes to certain sins. Others struggle with this, but not me, right? It's an issue for other people, but not me. And this series that we're doing, we look at the 10 Commandments, and many of us speed read this list. And it's easy for us to go to, in our own mind, we kind of, we're familiar with top 10s, right? We have our own ranking system as we look at things. And we look at the 10 Commandments, and for some of us, we wouldn't rank it the same way that God ranks it. And we speed read this list, and we look over some of the things, and we go, not me, not me, not me, not me, not me. And this week's focus on the second commandment, I think, is one of those. That's far too easy for us to look at and go, not me. Because you start talking about making graven images and idols. And it's super easy to check that box off and go, not me. Because I'm not making voodoo dolls in my garage, right? We're not whittling little statues and putting them up, on our mantle. That's what ancient people did thousands of years ago, but not me. We just don't think it's applicable to our life. But actually it is. It's very relevant to each and every one of us. And hopefully this morning we'll all begin to look a little differently at the second command and not be so quick to say, not me. And so in this series, we're looking at the Ten Commandments, and we're highlighting this idea that behind each commandment, there is a principle of relationship that we need to understand. Last week, Pastor talked about the first commandment, you shall have no other gods before me. And the relationship principle was priority, where God should be and ought to be and should be the priority in our life. And this morning, we're going to talk about the second commandment, and it's the principle of purity. And let me set this up a little bit. The second commandment starts with these three words, you will not. Or if you're of the King James persuasion, thou shalt not. In fact, 7 out of the 10 commandments actually start with these three words. And God is not saying that just because he is negative. He doesn't want you to have any fun. This is like you have your kids, and they want to go play in the street. And you say, you'll not play in the street. You're going to play in the yard with the fence. Because we're not saying you can't play in the street because the street is more fun, because all the cool things happen on the street. It's because it's dangerous. If you play in the street, it's risky. See, Israel was leaving Egypt, and they were entering Canaan, which was a land that had many gods and had many idols. And God was warning them, saying, don't get involved. In Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 9 through 11, it says this, when you come into the land which the Lord your God has given you, you shall not. See, there it is again. You shall not. Learn to follow the abominations of those nations. There shall not be found among you anyone who makes his son or his daughter pass through the fire. And right, that's basically a human sacrifice. Or one who practices witchcraft or soothsayer, or one who interprets omens, or a sorcerer, or one who conjures up spells, or a medium, or a spiritist, or calls up the dead. Go down to verse 14. It says, but as for you, the Lord has not appointed you such for you. The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet, capital P, like me from your midst, from your brethren, him you shall hear, capital H. He's talking about Jesus. Now let's skip to Acts 3:22, where Peter references this prophecy, and he says that Jesus is the fulfillment of that right there. Moses, for instance, said long ago, the Lord God will raise up a prophet, capital P, speaking of Jesus, among you who will resemble me. Listen carefully to everything he tells you. Now, here's what Deuteronomy 18 is saying. He's saying God hasn't appointed weird, spooky stuff for you, sorcerers and mediums and spiritists, but what God has appointed for you is a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And the 10 Commandments, where God says, you shall not do this, it's him saying, I've not appointed that stuff for you, idolatry and all that. I have appointed for you a relationship. And the 10 Commandments are about relationship. And so let's read the second commandment. It's found in Exodus chapter 20, verses 4 through 6. And it says this, you shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above or on the earth beneath or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the 3rd and 4th generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commands. This morning, we're going to kind of break this down verse by verse. And, this is a command. But the heart behind this command is one of bringing purity to our relationship with God. And if you look at it, he didn't start the 10 Commandments with murder. He didn't start the 10 Commandments with adultery. He's talking about putting God first and keeping that relationship pure. So let's pull out some principles as we go through each verse. Verse 4 says this: "You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the waters below." My first point is this: relational purity means not confusing creation with the Creator. The irony of this second commandment, to not make an image in whatever form, and he lists here nature, the ocean, all that. The irony is that God is giving this command to Moses on top of the mountain, and at the base of the mountain at the same time, the Israelites are melting down their gold rings and their jewelry, and they're making an image of a baby cow and proclaiming it as God, as the God who was responsible for bringing them out of Egypt. And we hear that and we go, are they crazy? Like, they were there. You know, they lived the events. How could they get to the place where they're thinking somehow that this baby cow they just made is responsible for bringing them out of Egypt? How could they replace God with a baby cow they just made out of their jewelry? And I'm not so sure we should be all that shocked. Isaiah 29, verse 16, listen to this. God says this: "You turn things upside down. Shall the potter be regarded as the clay, that the thing made should say of its maker, he didn't make me? Or the thing formed say of him who formed it, he has no understanding?" As I read that a couple weeks ago, I got this picture of a season in life that every parent has, or most parents have, some parents have, where there's a teenager in the house. And if you've ever raised teenagers, and I saw the hands, so I know I'm in the right place, then you know that there are points where they try to turn things upside down. They try to turn things upside down, and at points, and they say things like, you know what, I don't want you as my mom and dad. You're not the boss of me. I don't have to listen to you. You don't understand what I'm going through. You don't get it. Teenagers will attempt to turn things upside down and say things that aren't true, and they get things wrong. And there comes a point where you have to set things into place by saying, hey, we're the parents. You're the kid. And the second commandment seeks to do just that. Don't get things turned upside down. Don't get the created confused with the Creator. Say no to those lesser things. Say yes to God. Sometimes I read things that make me kind of cringe. And when I first read this quote from John Calvin, that's exactly what I did. He had this quote. He says this. He says, "The human heart is a factory of idols. Every one of us is, from his mother's womb, an expert in inventing idols." I read that and I thought of my heart being an idol factory. And the idea of being an expert in inventing idols. And it physically made me cringe. And in my self-talk, the conversation we all have in our head, the kind that you're having right now with me as I'm talking, that self-talk, I'm like, no, not me. Not me. But the more I thought about it, it is me. See, idolatry is more present in our hearts than most of us realize. King Solomon, considered one of the wisest fellows in the world, wrote the book of Ecclesiastes. And as the king of Israel, he had access to everything the world had to offer. He tried it all. He had more money than everybody else. At the conclusion of it, he said it's all vanity. He could buy anything he wanted. And it didn't do what he thought it was going to do for him. He had the best food in the world. He had the best clothes in the world. He had the best homes in the world. He had the best of everything. And his conclusion was it's all vanity. He pursued happiness in the context of power and business and work. But none of that worked either. He pursued contentment and peace in his heart in marriage. But that didn't work. He tried sex with hundreds of the most beautiful women in the world, and he said it was all in vain. There was nothing that his eyes desired that he denied himself. So basically, he never said no. He said yes to everything in the heaven above and the earth beneath and the waters below. I mean, can you imagine having that kind of access where you don't ever have to say no? And you don't? And at the end of the book, in Ecclesiastes, he concludes that there is only one thing under the sun that will actually fill the deep need of our hearts, that will actually satisfy the longings of our soul. And that alone is God. And he goes on to say in chapter 3 that only God can satisfy us, because that's how God created us. That's why all those things apart from God are a complete waste of time. That's why idolatry is so present, because we keep making up and inventing things to try and fit the space where only God was meant to fill. And I don't know what it is for you. It seems Solomon has a pretty good list going. But it's not simply about a statue of wood or precious metals or stone. It's moving God out of his rightful place in our day-to-day lives and replacing him with someone or something else. We live in a time where there is so much being thrown at us. There is so much being thrown in our direction at any given moment. And it is easy to sacrifice our time and our energy and our attention, not to God, but to the idols of entertainment and leisure and sports and technology and relationships and materialism and sex and money and stuff and control. But here's the deal. The physical shape of contemporary idols have changed. The physical shape of contemporary idols are not the wooden statues but the temptation for idolatry is stronger than ever. And if we're not careful, then these things and hundreds of others can be idols to us, and they begin to control our thoughts, and they begin to control our desires, and they subtly become our Lord. We worship happiness and personal leisure and self-esteem at all costs. We worship how we look. We bow down to our careers. We care more about personal rights than God-given responsibilities. We make every effort to look out for number one. We idolize our individual feelings. And like the Israelites at the base of the mountain, when we feel like God is too demanding, we remake him according to our own selfish desires. I mean, what are we supposed to call it? What are we supposed to call it when we think, you know what, my life is pretty full, but I'll try to squeeze God in? What are we supposed to call it when we say, I might have some time on Sunday to go to church, I mean, if nothing else comes up? If I don't have something else on the calendar? What are we supposed to call that? Jesus is not a cute little God of good fortune. He's the Lord of heaven and earth. And sometimes we get sucked into this thing, and it takes on different forms. We can worship. Now, I have a preference when it comes to music. But when I say things like, I will only worship God when I like the style of music, then we got to be careful, because then it seems like we're worshiping worship itself rather than God. And anytime he's not the object of our worship, then we have slipped into a dangerous path and made that a means to an end. St. Augustine says it this way. He said, idolatry is worshiping anything that ought to be used and using anything that ought to be worshiped. I think it warrants a little self-examination in our life. What preoccupies and rules my heart? My thoughts? My time? What compels me? What controls me? What drives me? What motivates me? What comes first when it comes to my schedule? What gives me a sense of worth? What defines my identity? What do I crave? If everything else was taken away, what is one thing I could not live without? Am I looking for someone or something else to provide what only God can? And when it comes to this issue, God does not hide his feelings. You know how sometimes you're around people and you're like, what did they mean by that? God does not do that. It's not simply second on the top 10 list. More than 50 of the laws found in the first 5 books of the Bible are directed against idolatry. In all Judaism, it is one of only 4 sins which the death penalty is attached. God dislikes it so much that he commanded the Israelites not to leave even a remnant of the people that they conquered. Listen to Deuteronomy 7 and then verse 16. He said, "This is what you are to do to them. Break down their altars, smash their sacred stones, cut their Asherah poles, and burn their idols in the fire." Verse 16, "You must destroy all the peoples the Lord your God gives over to you. Do not look on them with pity and do not serve their gods, for it will be a snare to you." Okay, God, tell us how you really feel. Why? Because idolatry flips things upside down. Where the potter is called the clay, and the teenagers running the parents, and the creation is confused with the creator. So we are prone to becoming idol factories, inventing all of these substitutes where we got all these things floating around, and we're hoping one of them is going to work. And that's the ultimate problem. We got all these things floating around, and if you're saying yes to all of those, God is simply letting us know that it's going to be impossible to say yes to him. See, the second commandment is saying there are boundaries. And if you're going to follow me, if this relationship is going to work, you're going to have to filter all those things out. I mean, it's kind of like drinking water in California, right? I paused too long. I don't know why. I was expecting a different reaction from you. All right, I don't know about you, but in my house, my ladies do not drink from the tap. All right? Does anyone bottled water, people? Okay, most of California. All right? And so my ladies actually don't even drink spring bottled water. They drink purified bottled water, right? The Costco thing. And here's the thing, is that purified water, it gets rid of all the contaminants. It purifies all that stuff out. They don't want to drink lead and dissolved solids and all that stuff and who knows what. It's filtered out all the contaminants. And what God is saying here is don't get confused. Don't flip things upside down. Quit saying not me. Filter out all the contaminants. Shut down the idol factory. Verse 5. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the 3rd and 4th generation of those who hate me. My second point is this. Relational purity is about realizing what you idolize will eventually become your curse. Idols lie. And they promise things that only God can deliver. And they do so to enslave us. Idols are false fronts. It's like the movie sets, you know, where you look at it on the one side, and you're like, wow, that's an amazing building. You walk around the back, and it's just, you know, sticks are holding it up. There's nothing behind them. Nothing backs up their promise of freedom and joy. The woman at the well discovered this. You drink all you want at the wells of the world, but you'll still be thirsty. The only way to satisfy your thirst is to be in a relationship with God. Psalms 135 talks about idols. It says they have feet, but they can't come to you when you need aid. It says they have hands, but they won't lift a finger to help you when you're struggling. They have eyes, but they don't see your heart or what's going on in your life. They have ears, but they don't hear you cry, or when you're lonely, or when you're afraid, or you're feeling hopeless. And the reality is, whenever you put something or someone in the place of God, you end up hating it when it eventually disappoints you. Jonathan Edwards says it this way, old-time preacher. He said this: what you idolize, inevitably you will demonize. It's this idea that when you bow down and worship it and you put so much weight on it and it collapses, you end up hating it and it becomes your curse. It's like this. Imagine there's a bridge and a sign in front of the bridge says max weight 2 tons. But you're driving a big rig tractor trailer and you got like 4 tons. You can't go across it. It's not designed for that kind of weight, because if you do, it will collapse. And the same thing happens with our souls. We put too much weight on these things, and they collapse, and then we hate them. That's why some marriages start out so well, but then they go bitter, drowning in a sea that sucks the life out of each other, and they end up hating each other. That's why some struggle with jealousy towards those who have more money than you do. You want money, they have it, you don't, you hate them for it. If you love the praise of others, you hate it when other people get praised and you don't, because they're stealing your glory. If you idolize family, you will end up bitter and be full of self-pity when your family disappoints you. And your kids resent you because you're trying to control them. What you idolize will ultimately become your curse. When you put something in the place of God, it puts you in a place where your soul begins to shrivel. And you'll become guarded and hateful toward anyone who threatens it. A great picture of this is J.R.R. Tolkien's trilogy, Lord of the Rings trilogy. And some of you guys have probably seen the movie. There's this fellow in there, Gollum. And so it's all about this ring. And I'm actually one of the fellows that read the books. So that tells you about me. When the Lord of the Rings was first published in 1950s, there was this lady who wrote the author. And she objected that the Dark Lord would never put all of his power into a ring. And she said, there's no way the Dark Lord would put all of his power into a ring, because that would make him vulnerable. It's an interesting thought, right? Because that's what we do. We put all of our hope and all of our power and all of our strength and all of our whatever into some external object or activity or person, which now makes us vulnerable. Are you following me? Because now if things don't work out with said person, if things don't work out with that activity, or when they fail you or disappoint you and expectations aren't met and things go bad, it ends in disaster because our life has been depending upon that one thing. It has replaced Jesus at the center of our life, and it's what we turn to instead of God to get what we want. And what does God say here in verse 5? I'm a jealous God. I'm a jealous God. Idols aren't jealous. Idols aren't jealous at all. Idols will let you worship anyone, everyone, and everything. Because as long as they enslave you, they don't care how it happens. But God is jealous, meaning he doesn't want just a part of you, he wants all of you. And he doesn't want to just be one of the many focuses of your life. He wants to be the only focus of your life. Meaning he doesn't want to simply be around your life. He wants to be the center of your life. And you can hear that and you can be so turned off. And you can say, God is so controlling. I don't want to be controlled. I want freedom. But here again, we can't get away from the irony that idolatry actually steals our freedom. Have you ever noticed how much freedom is lost in the name of freedom? Someone says, I am free to take a drink. But many times that drink takes that person. I am free to do drugs, but soon drugs can take them down and control them. I am free to have sex. But now they have an STD. And the consequences of that action outside of marriage. See, freedom comes with choosing the best master, and we are freest with God at the control of our lives. Acts 17:28 says, in him we live and move and have our being. But when we choose something else to have that control, it has lasting effects. And God is not saying here in verse 5 that our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren will be punished for our idolatry. Listen to the way the King James words it. It says, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. And then he says this, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children until the third and fourth generation of them that hate me. God is saying here that the way we worship has an impact on our kids. And in essence, the effects of our sin is projected on them. In other words, they will be affected by our decisions. And anyone who thinks that their decisions do not have an effect on their generations to come is not really getting it. If I live indifferently to the things of the Lord, if I continually give in to every suggestion, if I have a love affair with materialism and acquiring things at all costs, if I chase after empty, hollow images for the rest of my life, then my kids and their kids will live under that example and probably will struggle with that too. If God does not have a proper place in my life, then the repercussions will be felt from generation to generation. Basically, God is reminding us that our kids will copy our sins. They will follow our example when it comes to things we worship. Let me give you another example. In 2 Chronicles 26, we read the account of a king named King Uzziah. And Uzziah was a godly king up until the latter part of his life. In the latter part of his life, he started to believe that he knew what was best because he's been doing it for a while. And that's one of the dangers of doing things for a while, right? And so he disobeyed God. He sidestepped the temple priest, and he made the mistake of saying, I got this. I don't need to follow the rules. I got all this. And because of this, he got leprosy. He got a disease. Fast forward to chapter 27. His son, Jotham, becomes king at age 25. He refused to enter the temple. His dad had trouble with the church. Guess what? His son did too. Fast forward chapter 28. King Uzziah's grandson, Ahaz, became king when he was 20. Ahaz not only stayed away from the temple, he closed the temple doors. He began to worship other gods. And he even had his own kids sacrificed to these empty images. So let me recap. Dad had trouble worshiping God and was affected by it. Then his son quit going to church altogether. Then his grandson not only stopped going to church, but stopped others from seeking God and actively pointed them toward idols, not serving God. What God is saying here is that the things we worship and the things we serve and put in a place, when we put those in a place that was meant for him, will eventually become some of our deepest sources of pain for us and our family. Verse 6, but showing love to 1,000 generations for those who love me and keep my commandments. My last point is this: relational purity creates a legacy of blessing. I don't know about you, but I love the word "but" right here. It's like a door, right? It's a door that presents an opportunity to step out of the bad stuff and into the good stuff. But showing love, steadfast love, patient love, merciful love, a father's love to 1,000 generations. Now get this, when God was talking punishment, he's talking what, 3 or 4 generations, right? But the blessing can go for 1,000. What that tells us is that God is really happy to pour out grace. What that tells us is God is really happy to change families. What that tells us is God is really happy to have people with your last name be friends of his for long after you're gone. That is a legacy of blessing. But there are conditions to this, and the key is to love him and to keep his commands, to love him and to obey him. Listen, so many times in the Old Testament we hear 10 Commandments and we see judgment in our head, and we think laws, and we think rules, and we think control, and we think do's and don't. And there's part of us as Americans and a part of us as Californians that go, I just like to do what I want to do. Yet all of it is for relationship. It's all for good. God doesn't want you to walk in impurity. Do you know why he doesn't want you to walk in impurity? It's not because it's more fun. It's not because there's better results. It's because it will affect your relationship with him. He wants to have a pure relationship with you. And it not only will affect you, but it'll affect your kids and your grandkids and your great-grandkids. 10 Commandments aren't bad. Paul even says this in the New Testament. They're good. And they aren't a list of simply thou shalt not, thou shalt not, thou shalt not, because God doesn't want us playing in the street, because the street's more fun. They're a list of principles that if we understand this principle, it's going to bless us. It's going to bless everyone that lives after us. As the worship team comes, would you stand with me? We wrap up our time together. You know what? Maybe it's time to quit saying not me. Because you'd agree in your heart's been an idol factory lately. It's been all too easy to confuse the created with the creator, trying to fit all kinds of things in a space that was meant to be only filled by God. And you're frustrated, and you're tired, and you're feeling hopeless, and it's time to set things right. It's time to end the confusion. It's time to filter out the contaminants. Or maybe you're here this morning and you've been doing this for a while. And there's some things in your life that you've put a little bit too much weight on. And they're starting to, or maybe they even have, come crashing down. And it's become a curse to you. It's not only affecting you, it's affecting your family. Listen, you don't have a time management problem. It's a worship problem. It's not a greed problem. It's a worship problem. And if we would worship God, surrender, serve him, put him in control of our life, love and obey him, if we would worship him, then what God says here is that you are going to see significant changes in your life that'll affect not only you, but the legacy behind you. I talk to parents all the time. And it's hard to find a parent who has not cared deeply about their kids. They want the best for their kids. And one of the things we do for our kids, we do all kinds of things for our kids. We will put them in this activity, and we'll put them in this sport, and we will take these, we will rearrange our life and our schedules and our stuff. We will do all kinds of things in the name of our kids. But what God is saying here, listen, if you want to do something that will really affect your kids, long after you're gone, he says the first thing is put him first. Pastor talked about last week, put him first. The second thing, worship him and no one else. No one else. God wants freedom for you. He wants freedom for your family. He wants freedom for your legacy. I don't know where you find yourself this morning, but you know you need to take a step. So with every head bowed and every eye closed, maybe you don't have a relationship with God. And the thing that keeps scrolling through your mind is that you need to start one. If you want to say yes to Jesus this morning, begin a relationship with Him. Every head bowed, every eye closed. Would you just slip up a hand and say, that's me. I want to start a relationship with Him. This whole thing is about relationship. God's original plan was about relationship. He gave us these 10 commands because there's principles of relationship here. He wants us to be instilled in our heart. And you say, you know what? I realize here I don't have that. And you want to begin a relationship with Him. If that is you, just quickly, let's slip up your hand. Say, I want a relationship with Him. Say yes to Him. Maybe as we've talked about idols and confusion and things being turned upside down, your heart agrees that's you. You've been turned into anything and everything but God. It's divided you. You're frustrated. You're unhappy. It's time to filter those things out. If that's you, as a way to acknowledge, God, you are speaking to my heart. I am responding to you this morning. Would you just quickly, quick up, quick down, slip up your hand. Thank you. All over this room. Things have been turned upside down. And I need to make it right. Maybe you're feeling and seeing the effects of things you once idolized becoming a curse to you. It has become a deep source of pain. A relationship, an activity. It's affecting you. It's affecting your family. It's time to face it. It's time to deal with it. And it's time to reverse it. If that's you, just quickly, slow up your hand. Say, God, I'm hearing you today. I'm acknowledging. I've put way too much emphasis and priority on something other than you. I hear you. And I'm going to make it right this morning. Or lastly, maybe you're wanting to renew your commitment to bless your family, to developing a lasting legacy of worshiping God. And it is done by loving and obeying God. If that's a commitment that you want to renew, just like many have responded already, quick up, quick down. God, that's what you're speaking in my heart. I need to renew that commitment. Develop a lasting legacy in my family. It's not done by all these things that the culture looks to. I don't got to throw more money at my family. I don't got to throw more activities in my family. I don't got to get my kids involved in all these other things, although they're good. I need to get my life in a place of worshiping you. And the effects of that will be seen in my kids and my grandkids and my great-grandkids and the legacy. If you raised your hand or felt like you should have, but you didn't, this is what we do at Neighborhood Church. The front of the church here, we call these the altars. So we come and we stand or kneel or we don't put rules on you, whatever you want to do. But we just take this as a time to say, hey, I'm going to have a conversation. Maybe I raised my hand and said, I need a relationship with you. I'm going to come and I'm going to ask you into my life. I'm going to ask you to forgive me of my sin and cleanse me from all unrighteousness and welcome you into my heart, saying from this day forward, I live for you and serve you. Maybe I raised my hand and said, you know what? I've got things turned upside down. I got things a little confused. And so I'm going to come and I'm going to kneel or I'm going to bow and I'm going to have that conversation with you this morning and say, God, would you come in and make things right? Help me to release some things I need to release. take the grasp of my hand off of some of these things and people and put control back into your hands. Maybe I raised my hand. I said, you know what? I put a little bit, some things are crashing down. And I need you to come and to speak life and encouragement into me. And so at the altars, that's what we do. We come and that's where we have the conversation. And so if you raised your hand or maybe you felt like maybe you should have and you didn't, guess what? No one's watching and holding you to it. Just come. The worship team is going to begin to play. And as they do, I want to encourage you to come and find a place and have that much needed conversation with God. You know, I used to play the game and say, you know what? Yeah, God is speaking to my heart. God is saying some things, but I am going to do it later because right after church, I got to meet somebody. I got to have this conversation. I got to do this. I got to do that. 10 out of 10 times, I never followed up with God and did what I needed to do. I never came to God and said, I'm sorry. I never came to God and confessed that thing I needed to confess. I never came to God and said, you know what? I'm just going to throw everything on the table. And maybe you've had that. You've said, yeah, later, tomorrow, later this week. No. Today, this morning, now. Come. If he's speaking into your heart, come. I'm going to pray. Ashley's and the team are going to begin to sing. And let's make this a moment with God where he literally does something new in our life. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you for your goodness. I thank you that the 10 Commands are not something to be, rolled up and beaten over us. But God, it is a father speaking into his kid's life saying, I love you, I care about you, and I want a relationship with you. And all these things, these impurities, these idols, guess what? Don't get mixed up in that. Stay away from that. Give space to that. And it's not because I don't want you to have fun. It's not because I don't want you to experience all that life has. It's because I do want you to experience all that life has. It's because I think life has something more than what the world has for you. It's fake fronts. It's lies. You want life the way it was meant to be lived, then worship me. Serve me. Let's listen to some of those who've gone before us, like Solomon, who said it's all vanity. Let's listen to the life of King Uzziah, who said, you know what, he did his own thing and it affected his whole lineage. God, may we come to the place to say, you know what, I'm done saying not me. In fact, this morning I'm saying it is me. God, I come before you. Would you see me? Would you draw near to me? Would you forgive me? Would you help me? And would you lead me to love you and obey you, to worship you? In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Come, the altars are open.